Hey, y'all. Good evening, everyone. I am super excited to have you again in the house today. And my name is Ruth Hepzibah, and I am here, the host on Grief to Grace. You are welcome. So welcome to our podcast today. And today we have a very interesting guest in the house. And today we're looking at a different type of grief, a different type of grief, and that is caregiving. So, the grief associated with that. And we titled it Grace Through Caregiving, From Burned Out to Breakthrough with Caroline J. Murphy. So, once again, you're welcome to Grief to Grace, the podcast that guides you from the depths of sorrow to the heights of healing. And I am your host, Ruth Hepzibah, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today. Here at Grief to Grace, we believe in the power of sharing stories and also finding grace in our struggles and transforming all of our pains into purpose. So, today's special episode is lined up for you, and I know that you are ready to listen to this very beautiful episode that we have today. And I'm so particular about this one because it concerns a lot of us. And while I was talking with the guest speaker, I we talked a lot about caregiving and the basic things that are associated with it and all that we need to know about the grief associated with it and why we shouldn't allow ourselves to be burnt out from it so that we too can have a life. So, before we go into this, I'm going to introduce again my book, which is The Pen That Rewrites Grief. So, this book is one book that you need, and you can find the link to purchase this in our page and also on our website, and you will love it. If you check our Facebook page and all of our pages, you will see the link to purchase this either in the paperback or in e versions. Also, we have a lot of gift items we'll be giving out to very active listeners in this show. And at the end of this week, we're going to definitely give you those prizes that to those who have gotten those prizes. So I want to also share with you a grief program with Echoes of Life because this program is powered by Echoes of Life and it is more like an adopt a grieving family kind of project which we embark on. And if you feel you want to help a grieving family or you want to adopt one, please DM us or you go to our page on echoesoflife.org and you will be able to contribute towards that project. It is very important because people don't know that those who are grieving truly need help because they cannot do so much for themselves at that time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please share, and share and keep sharing this particular program because this is a project that God has given to us, and every day is becoming clearer why God asked me to do this. And the only way we can get this message to the ends of the world is if we keep sharing and allowing people know that they can find help somewhere, that their story is not different. There are people with other kinds of story, and every kind of grief is different. This platform is a platform that will help us move from grief to grace. I tell you, when God gave me this project, I didn't understand where God was taking us to, but every day it becomes clearer, and I'm thanking God because, and I thank all of you that keep sending me DMs and sending your stories and wanting to share on this platform. I am so grateful to you. If you know someone who needs to share his story, or you feel you need to share to the world, or you feel you need help at whatever point in your life, just DM us right here on Ruth Hepzibah or Grief to Grace, and we will receive it. Or you send a message to Grief to Grace now at gmail.com or at admin at echoesoflife.org. You will definitely be reached, and you will be happy that you're able to share your story and also give back to the society in the little way that you can. So today we have a guest in the house, but before we introduce our guest, I want to please beg you to stay to the tuned to the end of this program, stay tuned to the end of this podcast, so that you'll be able to get those nuggets, those real nuggets, the three nuggets that she will want to share today in her program. So thank you so much for joining us today. And today we have a very beautiful guest in the house. We have someone who is truly ready to share her story to the world. And she calls herself the lifelong caregiver. So the lifelong caregiver, that's who she is. And this is Jeanette. So Jeanette is in the house today, and she will be sharing her story of how she was able to navigate um, grief, taking care of her mom, and also as she lost her stepfather recently after he had a very horrible accident and was paralyzed. Grace has gotten her through, and she is a lifelong caregiver, and she is still in the business of giving those care to her loved one, her mom. And it is it's something that can take away a lot, and it took so much from her, but Grace found her and was able to put on so much energy, and at the end she is able to balance between it and is helping a lot of persons in that field, so that people will be able to help their loved ones. And today she'll be sharing how we can help our loved ones, and she's going to share her story on how she was able to navigate grief in this way. So, help me welcome our guest in the house today as we say, how are you, Jeanette?
I am so good. And I'm so thankful to be able to come on this podcast and share my story. Of course, I'm sharing just a part of the story today.
Yeah.
um, it's so long that I'm going to try to share the parts that I think will be most valuable to those people listening that are experiencing some kind of grief. I want to talk about some different types of grief today. Obviously, we are familiar with the type of grief that comes with loss. And as you mentioned in your intro of me, I did just lose my stepfather recently, but I'll get to that later because that is part of my story. But I want to just give a broad stroke of my lifelong caregiving journey because, as you mentioned, I
Yeah.
have been doing this quite a long time, to different degrees. I'm not going to pretend like at age 8 I was doing the same things that I'm doing at age 49, but nor did my mom need the same things that she did then. But when I was 8 years old, my mom was diagnosed with a neuromuscular and autoimmune condition that caused her to be hospitalized, have a surgery, emergency surgery. During the time she was there, she had just married my stepfather, and then like that happened a couple months later. So there was a lot going on in my life then. She got married to my stepdad. A month later, she was in the hospital and stayed in the hospital for a long time while she uh, had the treatment, had the surgery, and they got a handle on getting her stabilized from that. And while she was doing that, I was living with some relatives. And while at first, I don't think I really realized what was going on. Of course, eventually the weight of the situation um, with my mom became more and more obvious. And then as the time went on over the next, several years, several decades, there's been a journey of ups and downs of different types of caregiving that I did for my family. And again, this is a very broad picture. Of course, there were very, quote, normal moments in my life. Not everything was not everything was different, but there were a lot of things that were just different in my house than were in my friends' houses. I have several friends that I've known since before I was 8 years old that often comment about how my life was so different from theirs, because my mom was the center of our lives. She, her needs were very present and important to tend to. And so uh, I did a lot of that. So I remember when I was very young, it must have been right after she got out of the hospital and we all moved in. So my mom and my new stepdad and I all lived in a house together. And I remember it was my job to help my mom count her pills out for medication. So she took a lot of pills. This is back in the 80s. I think probably they just have higher doses now. And so we didn't have to count so many pills. But back then she was taking a lot of different medications. And a lot of them. So there was a lot of pill counting. That was like one of the first little caregiving duties that I remember having. And then over the course of the years, I would become a teenager. As soon as I turned 16, my parents, unlike all my other friends' parents, my parents were thrilled to have me have a driver's license because they immediately put me on the checking account. They immediately put me, gave me a list of things to do. And I became, one of the people that did the grocery shopping, or I would drive a lot for my mom, or all this kind of stuff. So it wasn't, for a lot of people that getting your driver's license is a real like freedom, moment. And for me, it was, well, now you can contribute more to doing stuff for the family, and especially taking over some of the things that your mom might not be able to do. So that's kind of how that felt to me in a lot of ways. Of course, I did get to use the car also for other things, but there was always that oh, well, now you can run errands kind of thing. Now you can go to the grocery store and get milk. And then, I remember there would be periods of time where I would be helping what a lot of people would normally be doing at my age, what might be helping with the chores, where in my house, it was really like, if you want clean clothes, you're going to wash the clothes. If you want, when the dishes are dirty, it's me that's going to clean them. And so a lot of times when I tell people I was responsible for that, growing up, the laundry, the house cleaning, the kitchen, they're like, well, yeah, I mean, of course you were a teenager. And it's like, yeah, there's a difference between contributing and being part of, the family and cleaning up and picking up and doing the things and being responsible for it. And it certainly was part of my role even before I was a teenager, which you would think would make me a very good housekeeper and laundry person. But I think like I have some sort of internal like resistance to it, because although I do like my kitchen clean, my clothes, it's very hard for me to fold them and put them away because I just have this aversion to it, I guess, from so long of it being my, like, one of my big duties. And so I lived in a house where the clothes didn't get cleaned until we absolutely needed them to get clean. The laundry didn't get, the kitchen didn't get clean until it was kind of gross in there. And, so it was kind of a weird, um, weird in many ways, but not unloving. I felt safe in many ways there, but there were also ways that I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe to have my own needs or um, speak up for myself because I was afraid that if I did that, it would take away from the needs my mother had. And so that would cause a lot of problems in my life because that repression of my own needs and the feeling that I wasn't getting my needs met, um, or able to ask for what I needed, was very traumatic for me. And I also developed a really strong but unhealthy attachment to my mom and my stepfather. And it was very hard for me to separate myself from them. And of course, I did go to college, but I lived near them. I did um, get married, but we were still very connected. And then, of course, in the last couple of decades, my mom and stepdad had gotten divorced about um, 18 years ago. And so, in the last couple of decades, I became really the sole caregiver of my mom. And like I said, for a while, she was able to do a lot of things. So it was kind of more like just, checking in with her. But then, probably in like 2009, 2000, she got 2009, she got cancer and had to be go under treatment for that. So I did the caregiving then. And then she kind of went back to being able to sort of be on her own, but just having like more attention paid to her. But then in 2014, I think it was 2014, it may have even been 2013, but we started kind of a slow spiral of things just gradually getting more and more difficult for my mom. All at the same time, she's trying to stay in her own home, stay independent as long as she could, even though she was becoming more and more dependent on me, on on other people to help her be, quote, independent. Now, this went on for a long time with me just doing what every daughter, especially in the South, uh, feels like they need to do, which is everything. We're just going to do whatever it takes to take care of mama. And that worked for a while. But then as my mom's needs increased, I started recognizing that I was back in that place as a little girl where I was not addressing my own needs. I was not asking for the help I needed. I was not getting my own needs met, uh, or able to even say how much I needed. All I knew is what I was exhausted and I still wasn't doing enough. And that's when I started to look for answers and take care of myself better. And so that's why I now help other caregivers do that, kind of break out of that burnout cycle. So that's what I do now at the Self Caregiver, is work with caregivers so that they do not feel as hopeless and exhausted as I did, and they can set up boundaries in their lives to take better care of themselves. But today I wanted to address the grief in all of this. And like you mentioned, it's a different kind of grief because I still have my mom with me. I'm not, I just was with her today. We had a nice visit. It was a little bit hard though, because she was tired today, but I see her often. But there is a grief that is still permeating this whole experience. And until I recognized and acknowledged it and allowed myself to feel that grief, I was still going to be stuck in um, that trauma of it. And I think maybe to some extent, the trauma will be there, the thumbprint of it will be there. But one of the things I had to acknowledge is the grief I've experienced over the last maybe 23, 24 years, especially. Um, I as a child, my mom did the best she could, but she was also fighting for her life. So there were times when I did not feel like she could do what I needed her to do as my mom. And this is not to say that she was unloving or or neglectful in any way. But there were times where the mom I needed wasn't able to be there. And that is something I have to grieve. That is something I had to learn to grieve. And even as an adult, there have been times where I have said, gosh, I'm having such a hard time right now. I really wish I could talk to my mom about this, but I can't. I can't talk to my mom about these things. So, and again, it's not, I'm not blaming her, but the bottom line is there were times when maybe my friends would be having a similar circumstance in their marriage or with their kids or with work, and they would go talk to their mom about it and get advice or, do that. And I really couldn't and can't do that in the way that my friends did. And I have to grieve that as well. I have to grieve the mom that I needed that I didn't have so that I can celebrate the mom that I do have still. And I do celebrate her. But that's one of the big areas of grief for me is admitting that. And even to say it out loud, I don't even know all the places this is going to be seen. But I'm willing to step in there and say that out loud so that other caregivers that feel the same know that they're not alone. It's okay to grieve the parent that you wish you had. And sometimes we do that. I have a lot of friends whose parents is struggling with some sort of dementia, and they are grieving the loss of their parent as they're still as they're still seeing their parent. Their parent is still alive. So that's another way this happens. But in my case, it's more about my mom's, been fighting for her life since I was 8 years old, which meant there were a lot of times where I was fighting for her and not for me. She was fighting for her and not for me. Or she was fighting for her and then trying to fight for me, but just could not give enough of both. Right. So I don't want to say that she never fought for me because boy, she has in many ways, but it was always, a risk to her health to do that. Okay. It was a risk for her to do that. And of course, that meant that I did not want to put her in that position. So, um, like I said, I just want all caregivers to know, all people to know that it's okay to grieve what you dreamed would be, um, what you had that now you don't have, um, and you're potentially gonna miss in the future. Um, there's a book out called As Long as It Takes by J.S. Parks. um, and he talks about when people are in a grief experience or in that phase where maybe things are falling away in their lives and they know the end is coming, they don't get homesick, they get time sick. They're thinking about a time that is no longer here or a time that never will be. And I think about that in terms of my own grief. Um, I have a memory of me and my mom before she married my stepdad. She was probably sick at the time, but we didn't know it. But she was still trying to live that kind of everything is normal life. And I have a memory of riding our bikes together, probably about like 8 miles one way, taking a break and riding 8 miles back um, in the town that we both still live in today. And that was like such a wonderful moment for me because it's one of the last memories I have of my mom actually being able to do something like that. And so I grieve that we didn't have more of those. But I don't want to stay there. I don't want to get stuck in that grief and pine over all that didn't happen. I want to think about, I want to grieve that and acknowledge it. And then I want to let it go so that I can embrace the good parts of my whole, 4-decade experience of caregiving for my mom, being a part of my mom's life and her being a part of mine as much as possible, even though a lot of it contributed to a very traumatic childhood. I mean, one of the things too about my grief in caregiving is that there have been many times. The first time was when I was 8, but many times since then that my mom was going to die. And that threat of her death has been looming over me for this whole time. And there have been many times that I took ownership and like wore it as you know, like a weight of responsibility that it is my job to make sure that she stays alive. And that is a great burden for a daughter of any age, but definitely a young one. And then one who gets married and is having her own family, which I do. I am married. I do have a wonderful family. But I have to deal with that complex trauma of constantly being hyper vigilant and on guard for so long about my mom's health. And then later, of course, adding family to that mix. A lot of times I had that kind of overbearing, obsessive attitudes toward my family too, because I just transferred the like, got to keep my mom alive to got to keep everybody else alive in my family. So there was a lot of stress and trauma there as well. So that's another part of grief. Trauma is grief in some senses and can cause grief. So that's something else that I'm learning to deal with. But with the death of my stepfather, that happened about 7 months ago. And one of the most interesting things that happened during that time was I still was caregiving for my mom, still am. But I'm my mom's caregiver. My stepdad was doing his thing, even though he and my mom had gotten divorced years before. He was one of my kids' grandparents. Like, he was still my stepdad, all of those things. So we had a really good relationship, but he was doing his own thing. I would see him periodically. And then he had an accident. He fell and hurt himself, and it ended up being pretty traumatic. And so for about 5 months, 4 months, he was struggling to heal, and he wasn't healing and he wasn't getting any better. And so while I was still my mom's primary caregiver and tending to her needs, she's in a nursing home now, but I'm still pretty active there, making sure she's getting well tended to and dealing with logistics and organization. I know, Ruth, we talked about that at the beginning where it's like administrative tasks and stuff like that. I also had to speak with my stepdad's family and get honest with them about what I was able to contribute to my stepdad's care. And it was hard for me and something I had to grieve, that I couldn't say, I'll just take care of everything. I knew I couldn't. I wanted to desperately to be in charge of his care as well, but I knew that I didn't have the capacity to do so and give him the quality of care that he needed. And so luckily my uncles were able to step in, and the three of us worked out a plan. I was the only one here in the same town. So I was able to be like boots on the ground. They handled the administrative, all that kind of gobbledygook, financial, insurance, all that. Thank goodness, because that's not my stuff at all. I hate having to deal with it, although I do deal with it for my mom. But I had to do what I could and let go of what I couldn't do for him. At the same time, still caregiving for my mom. And the week my stepfather passed away, my mom was in the ICU on a ventilator. So her life was once again hanging in the balance as it has been so many times before, while my stepfather was on the other side of town under hospice care. And I knew it, we all knew it wouldn't be long, but had no idea when it was going to be. And My mic muted on its own. Okay. So I'm in the daytime, I'm at my mom's hospital room in the ICU while she's on the ventilator talking to her doctors. And then I would go home and in the afternoon and rest. And then I would go to see my stepdad, um, or check in with my uncles, depending on what was happening. And then I would go home and sleep. And then I would get up and go to the hospital with my mom. And the night my stepfather passed away, I actually decided not to go see him because I was really tired and I was with my husband and one of my children was home and we were engaging in conversation and I was like, I'm really tired. I'll go see my stepdad tomorrow. I'm going to stay here and have this time with my family. And then later that night, I got the call that he had passed away. And I cried and I was briefly, kind of PO'd at myself that I didn't go see him one more time. But I also know, he was not conscious. And we had said we had said what we needed to say to each other when I had gone the day before. And so, and I knew that other people that loved him had been going over the course of those days. And I was able to let that part go. But the next morning, I woke up, and even though I wanted to just stay in bed and cry and be sad for like 5 minutes or 5 hours, I had to get up and go to the hospital to check on my mom. And I had to bring my grief with me because I couldn't set it aside. So that's what I did. I walked into the ICU where my mom was, and I'll never forget this. My mom was actually recently back in the same ICU, and I saw this nurse and I told her about this. But the nurse saw me coming around the corner, and they had known that my stepdad was across town in hospice. And she said, "How's your stepdad?" And I just shook my head. And before she let me go into my mom's room, she hugged me for a very, very, very long time and let me have a moment. And then I went in and was with my mom as long as I could be. And then I went home and went to sleep like I normally did. Um, so learning about grief in that moment and knowing that I had to embrace the grief where it was and how it was, and I couldn't change anything about what was going on. I had to still go take care of my mom or still go check in. She was being well tended to. Oh, my sneeze. Excuse me. Um, I, you know, I could spend a lot of time thinking about how that wasn't unfair. And I think maybe I was like, I did get angry that morning when I had to wake up after that he passed away. And I did say, like, I just want to not have to go to see mom today. Just, I don't want to have to talk to her at the doctors. But um, I did need to go. I did need to check in with the doctors. So I did that, but I didn't pretend that I wasn't grieving. And I think that is the biggest gift I gave myself and honestly to my mom, um, who is also grieving my stepfather's death, even though they were no longer together. Again, there's this idea of her grief, is she's got her own things that she's grieving about with that. And so is part of my caregiving also to help her grieve that, that experience? I don't know, but I know it's something that we talk about a lot. And I feel like, we're still just taking it one day at a time, both in our own grief for his passing and also, um, in our own grief for what's happening with my mom's health now. It was interesting that I'm doing this today because I was with my mom earlier today, and I go to the nursing home a few times a week to, check in, do, say hey, and grab laundry, whatever. Um, and then on Saturdays is the day that I go and we actually just kind of do something fun. So it's not like, you know, things to do. It's just more like story time or paint nails or do a facial or something fun. But today, she really was too tired to engage with me. And she said, I'm sorry that I'm too tired. And I had to say to her something I believe to be true, which is that we don't need to apologize for the time that we have. We don't need to assign it like this was a good time or this was a bad time. It's just time. And we don't know how much of it we're going to have. So we don't have to try to make it something that it's not. We can just be present in it. And I also told her that she can let go of that expectation of wanting things to be different because that's what I've had to do. I've had to let go of the expectation that these mommy and me days are going to be anything different than what they are. They just are what they are, and each time is precious. Um, even if it's 10 minutes. Sometimes it's, a few hours. And I think that's the most important thing to remember is that um, whether every time is perfect or every time is terrible or whatever, however you want to describe the time that you have with your loved one, you're still gonna grieve in the end. So trying to let go of all those expectations while you can is something that I'm practicing. I'm under no illusion that when my mom passes away, that um, I'm not going to grieve, or that I'm not going to think back and maybe wonder if things could be different. But I'm going to try not to do a lot of that. I'm going to try to just focus on the time that we had was what it was, and it was enough. Um, it was good enough. I'm good enough. We're good enough. It's all enough. So that's my story on how I'm dealing with the grief that still is and the grief that is coming and the grief that was.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jeanette. I am so inspired by you. No, I told you that the first time. I'm saying it again. I'm really inspired because hearing about your story, especially knowing that you started this job, being a parent at the age of
Mhm.
8, sometimes it makes me look back at some stuff that's, because most times when kids, I feel so much. I tell people, because most people believe that kids don't grieve.
Mm.
Children grieve and
Mhm.
grieve very well. And
Yes.
their kind of grief is so bad, and that's why they cannot. Most times, if you're not careful, they get into all sort of things because it's
Right. Well,
yeah,
yeah, well, and one thing is, like, I didn't know I was grieving when I was 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 because I didn't know I was allowed to grieve, and I didn't understand necessarily all the time that things were different. Like, my friends tell me now, like, "Oh, girl, your life, we all," it was
yeah,
weird, but I just thought it was the way things were. But what I will say is my 8-year-old self did not feel safe, and I know that now. And to your point, there are a lot of ways that I tried to make myself feel safe that were not healthy, right?
yeah,
So that you like that's what you're talking about. Like when teens when kids or teens are acting out, a lot of times we think, there's some sort of like there is something wrong, but we think it's you
Yeah.
know, we think it's this other thing, but really it's like they're trying to express something that they don't have the words for.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's definitely something to acknowledge, and something now looking back, I'm like, oh, that's probably why I behaved this way or did this. I'm actually, you talked about your book. I'm actually writing a book right now, and that's one of the things that I talk about is there were a lot of things that in my childhood that I can look back on now and say this was my cry for help,
Yeah.
that I was in pain, I was scared, I was lonely, and I
Yeah.
didn't know what to do. So I did this thing instead of being able to just use the words and say, I'm scared, I'm lonely, I'm
Yeah.
afraid. So, yeah.
Because you're right. Because sometimes they don't just want to offend you. They don't want you to feel bad as a parent or the person.
Hmm.
Because me, I'm using myself now as an example. Because they know they have a grieving mom at some point, and they need to have their mom always because they've already lost their dad. So what
Hmm.
do? They hide their own grief,
Hmm.
and they try to help you manage your
Right.
it.
Hmm.
Before you know it, what happens? These kids begin to act up, begin to have some other emotional stuff buckled up all over in their hearts. And if you don't manage it and you don't see it well or early, it leads to a lot of things. That's why you see a lot of kids getting into substance abuse, pornography,
Hmm.
and all the sort. And that is very key that as parents we know these things. And another thing is because another thing I learned this when I've already lost my husband, and that was allowing the kids to play the parent. So when they
Mm, yeah.
start playing the parent, the child is already feeling like the parent, and the
Yeah.
child will never have a childhood. I was talking to someone the other day. I said, "Can you allow this child be a child?"
Hmm.
So most times, parents are not allowing their kids to be kids, and
Yeah.
these kids grieve it. It may not be as a result of loss. Maybe they not because of that. Some people just feel they want to use their kids as a tool to make money. Some parents want to use their kids for other stuff, trying to make them act more maturely than they are originally supposed to be. A child
Right.
at 8 should act 8. A child that
Yeah.
is 10 should be allowed to be 10. And
Hmm.
there were some times, like my eldest son, I'm still trying to work on him till now because when his father passed and he assumed when the dad was dying, he actually called him when he was sick and said, take care of your mom and
Uh,
take care of your siblings.
mm,
Promise me you're going to take care of your mom and your brothers. And
mm,
he accepted. And now
yeah.
he got that responsibility that these people
Hmm.
are my responsibility.
Right.
They are not your responsibility,
That's
honey.
right.
So we keep talking about that every day. I'm not your responsibility. These are not your responsibility. You are your responsibility.
That's right.
Yourself.
Well, and the truth is, none of us are, I mean, we all like we want to take on the responsibility for other
Yeah.
people. And of course we care for one another, especially our siblings, our parents. We love one another. We're part of a community, we live in a community. We, love your neighbor, all that. But there's personal responsibility, and a
Yeah.
lot of times I think caregivers, and like to you, like what you're saying, like I can remember as a child, I can relate to your son right now, because I remember as a child, my mom says, don't ever let me go in a nursing home. Promise me you'll never put me in a nursing home. Promise me, promise me. Well, of course I promise, because I'm like 15 or whatever, and of course it's like, whatever. Okay, mom, I promise, because you want to be that, like in the movies where you're
Yeah.
like that, you know. And then, so 30 years later, it's like, but you promised. And it's like, yeah, I didn't know what I was saying.
Yeah. You were a
I,
child.
I made a promise that I had no idea what I was talking about,
Yes.
and nor did you. And like, and so like, it's like, and of course I didn't know I could say that for a long time. So I didn't say that for a long time. I was like, you're right, you're right, you're right. I promised, I promised, I promised. And then finally I was like, I I promised, but I was not, I was not fully understanding the
You
circumstances
were-
here. I I did not, you know, I'm
yeah,
sorry I made that promise, but I am going to have to break it.
that's it.
And yeah, so you can tell your son, yes, it's okay to be responsible to someone without being responsible for someone. Like, you know, you can have input in their lives, but they ultimately, are responsible for their own lives.
Yes,
Yeah.
because it makes them burnt out, and because they now end up becoming like a caregiver. You want to
Mhm.
do everything. You feel, oh no, 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 don't do it. I'm responsible for my family. No, you're not. You are playing a parent.
Yes.
And most people allow their kids to do that, and it's not
Yeah.
good. And they keep grieving it over and over again because they have to work to feed the family. They have to be part of the bills in the home. They have to clean up. They have to do all sort of stuff. And they don't have time to play as a kid. And
Right.
also, you talked about the time we have. I think
Mm.
he like that because it hit me so much. He said we don't need to apologize for the time. It is time, and we don't know how much we have, and we don't know how much will be present. So I think
Mhm.
it's actually something that people need to understand, that the little time we have, we should plan it well and put ourselves and every part of us in it and our love,
Mhm.
because we are their caregivers.
Yeah.
I'm his caregiver. So I must make sure that they have a good childhood. Take them out to the park. Let them enjoy the moments that they're supposed to enjoy. Play the kind of play they need to play, and not play the adult. They shouldn't be adults when they are not adults. They
Mhm.
should play like kids and do the things that we enjoyed while we were growing up to. And because and you also talked about we letting go, because each
Mhm.
time is precious, and I think
Mhm.
that's key. So do you think, how do you want to advise, if you want to talk to somebody about letting go, how will you advise the audience on what they should let go and how they should go about it?
So this is something I'm actually working on. I'm working on a podcast episode in a couple of weeks about this because I hear it often in different ways. So there's the type of letting go that we're talking about with this, you know, um, letting go of expectations of what things should be like or should feel like. There's the letting go of what we don't have anymore. So like we can keep being. Grief is going to take as long as it takes, like that book that I mentioned from J.S. Park, takes as long as it takes. But we can begin to let go of holding on to, like, oh, it's so unfair that they're gone. Oh, it's so unfair that they're not, maybe they're still here, but they're not able to participate the way that I want them to. They're not able to be the father or the grandmother or the stepdad or whatever, right? We can start letting go of all of those expectations. One of the things that really helped me, and I know a lot of people are going to roll their eyes at this, but this is really what helped me. So I'm just going to share it. We could talk about it. But learning to be present in the moment without judgment. So um, instead of worrying about all the things before, what I'm sad about, what I'm mad about, what even I'm happy about, whatever happened before, maybe if I'm happy about something, if I try to bring that into the present moment, try to recreate that happy feeling again, I don't want to do that either. And and let go of all the stuff that's coming next, all the things I have to do, all the things that I want to do, all the things that I don't want to do. Like, let go of all that and just focus on being present in the moment. And practicing mindfulness is teaching you how to do that. And so a lot of people are like, I don't practice mindfulness. It's really hard. My brain goes all over the place. I feel stupid, all those kind of things. I get it. That was me for a long time. I thought I was too scatterbrained to do it. But then I found a teacher and then I studied under him. And he teaches mindfulness, and he uses some of the work of a famous mindfulness practitioner, John Kabat-Zinn, who talks about, mindfulness is just being present in the moment without judgment.
Hmm.
So all literally, and then another one of my the people that I've learned from mindfulness from says mindfulness of breath is breathing and knowing that you are breathing. So if
Hmm.
all you're literally all you have to do to practice mindfulness is breathe and pay attention to your breath.
Hmm.
Whether you do that for 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or an hour, you're practicing mindfulness.
Wow.
And for me, I know. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't sound as hard as like staring into your inner soul and,
Yeah.
whatever. Like that's
Oh,
this is all I have to do is breathe and say, hey, look at me, I'm breathing. And like, so one of the things that I do, um, I did this in my Facebook group that I have for caregivers. We did mindfulness in May. And so I would go live and do mindfulness practice with them. But one of the things that we did was like, hey, just start breathing. You don't have to change your breath. Like a lot of times people are like, I have to do deep breath. No, just breathe. You just breathe like like you're breathing right now. And then
because
just pay attention to it. Are you breathing through your nose? Are you breathing through your mouth? Okay, I'm breathing through my nose. Okay. So when you breathe through your nose, how does it feel when it comes in your nose? Can you feel like the hairs in your nose? And it's kind of funny, but like you're like, oh, I can kind of feel my hairs moving in my neck. And you're thinking about breathing, but you're mindful of just your breathing. So like as you start to think about it more, you go deeper and deeper. So for me, it's like, okay, I'm breathing through my nose. Oh yeah, it feels cool when it goes in my nose, but when it comes out, it feels warmer. That's interesting. And then I keep breathing. And so like I'm just paying attention. And then I'm like, where oh, okay, now I feel my chest rising. So that's another place I feel the breathing. So I pay attention to that. And then maybe I notice that my stomach is going in and out. Maybe my shoulders are going in and up. So I just pay attention to where it's going. Is it going all the way down? Or is it stopping at my chest? I'm not trying to change it. If it's only stopping at my chest, fine. If it's going into my belly, fine. If I decide that I want to start, if my nose gets stuffy and I need to breathe through my mouth, fine. And, before long, I've been doing it for 5 minutes and I've only been paying attention to my breath. When you're able to do that for just like I said, 1 to 5 minutes and practice that mindfulness, that allows you to learn presence. That allows you to learn non judgmental presence. And right then, you're just doing it with yourself and your breath, but you've experienced what it means to be present in the moment without judgment. And then that eventually, it doesn't happen overnight, but eventually you can be with your mom. For example, today I was
yeah,
with my mom and we had plans to paint our fingers and toes and tell stories and do all these things,
yeah,
but that wasn't happening. So I just was present in the moment and I didn't say, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, or, oh
yeah,
no, she's so bad. She can't oh, this is horrible. Like I didn't judge the moment for being sad or, not as fun as I wanted it to be, or, like it didn't count as a visit. And even she was like, does this count? Is this enough? And I'm like, hey, this is what we have right now. It's going to be enough because it's what we have. It's what we have. And so
yeah,
learning to be, and so we tried to just be present in the moment the way it was. And so that's how mindfulness works, like in life, when you're not just sitting there breathing and paying
yeah.
attention to breathing.
No, I really appreciate that's a good one because most people may not really understand the impact mindfulness has, especially in our lives. And when we are really, we need it for everyday life, and it's going to bring down your anxiety level and
Mhm.
everything. So,
Right.
really, that's a very good one. Thank you
Oh,
so
well, you're
much
welcome.
for
Thank
sharing
you.
today. I'm really so happy. I'm so excited because this is one part that people really don't understand, that is so it's eating them deep into them and eating into their relationships and their lives, and they
Mhm.
have to live with it for the rest of their life. Thank you.
Mhm.
And before we go, I want to say thank you, and also I want to remind you of our book.
I
So
love it.
try and get this book, and you will be so glad you did. Get it. When you get it, you're going to have a bonus, and I'm going to send you a workbook in weekdays. So when you get this, you will get a free workbook when you get this book. So thank you so much for joining us today. I love everything that we talked about. I love the fact that you talked about time sick and not time sick. I think we need to bring you back here someday because there was so much that we needed to talk about and we couldn't really exhaust them. But I know a lot of persons have been able to learn something from this. So I will not leave without saying, know what you can do and be intentional about it. And also, do not accommodate self guilt no matter what.
Mm, that's
So,
right.
thank you for joining us today. And remember that Jesus loves you, and even Jesus grieved. He
Mm,
wept, and when he wept, he grieved that moment. So, it is okay to grieve. It is okay to not to be okay. Thank you. And I know that we'll meet again in the next one. And I love you.
Thank you. Love you too.
Yeah, love you.